Hello everyone, my name is Suntosh Pillay. I'm a clinical psychologist in Durban and I work in the public sector at King Dinizulu Hospital Complex. I'm also one of the co-directors of SADAG, which is the South African Depression and Anxiety Group in KwaZulu-Natal, and I'm one of the co-founders of the KZN Mental Health Advocacy Group. I'm going to speak about suicide today. It's not a topic that many people look forward to, but it definitely is an important conversation that we need to have as a country. There are 23 suicides per day in South Africa, and this number is actually very underreported. Men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women, and organizations like SADAG have been receiving up to 1,400 calls a day to their national helpline. This does mean that this is a silent pandemic, and as far back as 1995, the World Health Organization declared suicide a public health crisis around the world. In fact, it's the 10th leading cause of death globally. There's 1.5 million suicides a year, and that was including last year in 2020. And there's more than 500 million people every year who experience some suicide-related bereavement. So there are many people dealing with feelings of grief, guilt, confusion when a loved one does attempt suicide. So we know that this is in fact a very important conversation that we need to have. And many people are left with more questions than answers when they find out that a friend or a colleague or a loved one or their partner or child has actually attempted suicide. We know that depression is one of the leading causes of suicide, and most people who do attempt suicide are depressed as well. However, as psychologists, we do have other theories about why people might attempt suicide or might think about suicide. And one of the theories I'd like to talk about today is one by Thomas Joyner. And he's a clinical psychologist from America, and he's written a book, a famous one back in 2005, called Why People Die by Suicide. And Joyner says that there's 3 things that we have to pay attention to that can predict whether someone might attempt suicide. The first thing is social disconnection. Joyner says that people start feeling disconnected from the people around them. They feel like they don't belong anymore. They feel all alone. They feel like their colleagues, their family, their friends, and their loved ones don't understand them, and they begin to feel increasingly isolated. The second component is feeling like a burden. And in this theory, Joyner says that people increasingly start feeling guilty, that the experiences that they are having are causing an unfair burden on other people. It might be, for example, because they are unemployed and they feel like they are a financial burden on others. They might feel like they don't have a place of their own to stay. They might feel like they are unable to take care of their kids or their loved ones. So this feeling of being a burden makes people start believing, often incorrectly, that their family or friends will be better off if they're not around anymore. And this is when that suicidal thinking might start kicking in. But in order for that feeling of social disconnection and that feeling of being a burden to actually lead to a suicide attempt, Joyner says that there needs to be a third condition, and that is a feeling of not being able or not feeling afraid to die any longer. And that's when you start developing the capability for suicide. When someone feels like, I'm not afraid to die, it's something that I'm willing to embrace, it can become quite a toxic mix. And that's what creates the desire for suicide. So it's very important that when we're thinking about people who are suicidal, we ask ourselves, how can we address each of these 3 conditions? As a reminder, they are a feeling of social disconnection and not belonging anymore, a feeling of being a burden, and feeling not afraid to die. Therefore, if we're going to help people who are suicidal, we need to help them socially connect. And one way in which we can do this is by getting people to attend mental health support groups where they can feel understood and talk to people who might have been in their shoes before. We need to help people speak to their family members openly, and family therapy can play a big role over here. Because if families can convince people that in fact they are willing to stand by them while they go through this terrible depression, and they are in fact not a burden on them, that will help address those misconceptions. And lastly, we need to give people some sense of hope so that in fact they find a reason to live rather than a reason to die. These are some of the ways in which we can assist people, because if we don't, many people might feel like they have nowhere to turn to, when in fact, often there is help available. As a psychologist, I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands of people who have been suicidal. And one of the most common things that I hear is that people felt that nobody would understand what they are going through. If you are suicidal, or if you know someone who might be suicidal, please advise them to call SADAG's helpline, which is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. The number is 0800 567 567. That's 0800 567 567. Or visit the SADAG website, which is sadag, SADAG.org, and you'll find lots of resources to help someone out. There's no reason to suffer alone when help is available. Thank you.